and every single one of you. A special welcome to all our speakers this morning, our panelists, and of course, all the participants who have taken the time to join us in celebrating World Planning Day 2021. The topic, obviously, and this being day 2, just to remind delegates that the topic is strengthening the co-production paradigm in planning. And just looking back at yesterday, you have to concede that we had an amazing array of speakers, not to mention the kind of content, the academic content, and of course, the experiences that were shared across the globe. Coming out of the 4 breakaway rooms, you will hear presentations this morning of an overview of what actually happened in those breakaway groups, just so that we have a full appreciation of what issues around co-production. But my job this morning is, while I facilitate the panel, is to really now hand over and to call on the coordinators of the 4 rooms, breakaway rooms, to basically feedback this morning. So thank you very much. And if I could hand over to the first room, that would be Sam and Kayla, if you would perhaps respond with your presentation. Thank you.
Yeah, good morning, everyone from across the globe. My name is Medaisha Samuel from University of KwaZulu-Natal. And the room 1 was coordinated between myself and Kayla Hannah Brown of South African City Network. And our room dealt with understanding the institutional framework for co-production and its ability to deliver sustainable infrastructure. Now, in this breakout room, we had an introduction, an overview of what co-production and its institutional dimension is all about. We're able to come to the understanding that the involvement of citizens in the creation and production of public services and infrastructure is one of the major topics in urban discourse across the globe. Academics from all over the globe seem to have joined forces in international scientific networks where citizen engagement in the public domain is the focus of research. This should not come as a surprise, as government worldwide also rediscovered the citizen as an essential factor responsible for designing and implementing public policy and urban infrastructure. To ascertain the extent of infrastructure administration, management practice, and research, this goes on hand in hand. The various tiers of government have embraced citizen engagement as they consider it as a valuable way to overcome some real or perceived challenges they are confronted with, like the need to make public infrastructure and service delivery more efficient, effective, democratic, and to restore trust in and satisfaction with government and politics. Now, urban planners then have the responsibility to observe and evaluate this trend critically and scientifically, focusing on the following questions. When citizens take more significant role in the design implementation of urban infrastructure and services, does this improve the services? Does co-production increase the democratic level of infrastructure and service delivery? Why would citizens want to make the effort of engaging in co-creation or co-production? Furthermore, are public servants in turn interested in involving them, that is the community? In answering these questions is not only relevant from a fundamental scientific point of view, but it is potentially also helpful for practitioners who constantly need to improve the administrative practice of public policy and public service delivery, especially as citizen engagement gradually turns from marginal thoughts to mainstream practice? We need answers to these fundamental questions. These questions we hope were going to be answered by our esteemed presenters. And in order to start with, we decided to practice what we were going to preach by involving our audience using the Mentimeter survey and asking them the question, what words come to mind when we talk about co-production? And the word cloud you find here on my presentation are the various inputs from from the various participants, the guests in our room. And you see that collaboration is one major issue, one major word, which most of the audience actually typed in the Mentimeter. And outside collaboration, we have issues around public participation, collectiveness, partnership, together, and several of those words that appear strongly in the diction of co-production as imagined by our guests in the room. Now, we also went further to ask, what are some examples of institutional frameworks or policies, e.g. policies, legislation plans that enable co-production? And what we have here is the response from our various audience. This audience told us that special development framework precinct plans, spatial frameworks, IDPs, integrated development plans, precinct plans, municipal system acts, PLUMA, spatial development framework, and several others. All these are words that come to play when examining the issue of co-production and the words that are institutionally employed when addressing co-production. Now, after this activity, we went into our various presenters. 4 presenters were actually taken, 4 presentations were taken. The first was from Dr. Catalina from the United Kingdom, who gave us the various perspective of international best practices when talking about co-production. She gave us examples from Sierra Leone, from Europe, from several places in the world, making comparison between the different ideals of co-production in different climes of the world. Then we went further to our second presentation, which was presented by Dr. Faith Kasim, but it was a co-authored presentation between Professor Bolani Wahab, the Dean of Built Environment, University of Ibadan. And it was about community sensitization for risk and disaster management efforts in Nigeria. This presentation took us through series and realms of sensitization activities in terms of the disaster management and the various efforts that are being made by planners in order to ensure that information communication is ensured in the process of disaster management and reduction within Nigeria. And our third presentation was by Debbie Hendricks of the Nelson Mandela Bay Municipality Development Agency, who took us through several activities in terms of informal settlements and the challenges they are faced with, how these activities are carried out, the funding for all of these activities, the budgeting system for these activities, and several other issues actually came up. And the last but not the least on our presentation was by Professor Arnel Duplessis, who is the Esachi Chair in the Northwest University, who took us through the legal framework for co-production. We were able to understand that co-production must actually have a legal framework, must actually have a legal instrument in order to drive home the point that the community is actually the most important factor when you are considering the production of infrastructure, when you are carrying out your plan and planning. Then, what are the various takeaways? Sorry. Now we have the various take-homes from all this presentation. The first is that planning is a local affair and must be practiced as such. These issues came up very strongly in the course of this presentation. Also, we understand that planning has costs and social implications. and must be handled most efficiently. Planning is a legal instrument for structuring the city and creating balance. And last but not the least is that planning can be tyrannic if poorly handled, and the eventual outcome is a chaotic urban environment. This was the report from the room 1 that dealt with in the institutional framework for co-production in the World Planning Day 2021. Thank you very much for listening.
Thank you, Sam and Kayla. If you could move on to the next room.
Good morning, colleagues. I will be presenting the feedback for session for room 2. And our subtopic was planning and economic development. How true are we to co-production in our plan making? In our room, we had speakers from all sectors, from the private sector, academia, and government. And in our room, we unpacked the importance of increased community involvement in social cohesion, as well as the role of all parties in economic development and planning. We had 5 speakers that are listed in this presentation. So firstly, we first tried to understand the concept of co-production in itself, whereby we looked at co-production as a participatory strategy where the actors in the development space can engage each other in order to advance the course of progress of the society and the well-being of citizens. So we also looked at building social capital by building supportive relationship and increasing confidence of the communities whereby that we will be engaging in. We also looked at co-production as an arrangement where citizens produce, at least in part, the services that they themselves would be part of, and instead of the service being provided by government. It is about the interaction between citizens and state service providers. And we also found that this is a response due to the decline in government capacity, whereby communities now found the need that government is not able to supply all of the services in itself, and they can actually play a vital role in the supply of these services and infrastructure. And we found that in co-production, relationships must be restructured and can be initiated by any of the actors, whereby terminology such as invited spaces, inverted spaces, and networked spaces were discussed by the speakers that we had in our room. Networked spaces is a space in which two provide and shared and integrated planning, implementation, and learning. So this is not a space where it is initiated by the state, that is more legislative, that provides citizens with the rights to public participation. And it is also not inverted spaces that is initiated by users in the formal non-legislative space that is created by citizens to protest against local government. So it is a space that is in between these two, whereby the two can learn from each other. It's more integrated, and there is more of a coordination between the state and the citizens. Co-production and economic development and planning. Here, the key points that were raised by our speakers is that the growing population puts pressure on the limited resources that we have in the country. Thereby, there seems to be a failure of services being delivered to the communities, and communities now playing a key role in facilitating the development of their own communities. One of our speakers actually emphasized on the informal economy and the vital role that co-production plays in the informal community. And also, it was also highlighted that for effective implementation of plans, planners need to reimagine the outcomes they expect from the informal economy. And the key to effective co-production is building trust. And how do we build this trust? It is through encouraging coordination, improving communication and transparency, and charting a mutual beneficiary trajectory, and also creating an enabling environment. And how do we create an enabling environment? And this is through trust, building trust, because you would find that in communities, people have had very bad experiences whereby they now lack a trust that the government will actually deliver the services that were promised, and they would sometimes have a reluctance in even participating in such participatory initiatives because of that lack of trust. And also, we discussed the key components for successful co-production within planning and local development. And these key components include recognizing people as assets, building on people's capabilities, developing two-way reciprocal relationships, encouraging peer support, and blurring boundaries between delivery and receiving of services, facilitating rather than delivering. Findings that we found from the discussions that we had in room 2 was that in order for co-production to be a success, multiple stakeholders have to be involved. And these include residents, governments, civil society, for combined knowledge sharing, and also better decision-making process. Also to interrogate the different methodologies in order to understand the spaces in which they're planning for. Because you would find that if planning is coming from the state, there is no true understanding of what is happening on the ground. And there needs to be the involvement of people since from the design stage, because people have better knowledge of the spaces in which they live in. There needs to be knowledge sharing, which is vital for impactful local economic development. And currently there is pressure on the existing infrastructure due to urbanism across the world, which leads to the decline in the capacity of the states to provide the services. Co-production builds on social capital by building supporting relationships and transfer of power in the delivery of services. So we found that in order for co-production to be successful, government has to be willing to share power or diffuse power to the people who would have a better understanding of the places in which they reside. And we also spoke about the concepts of invented and invited spaces, which would assist to moving towards network spaces where there is shared and integrated planning, implementation, and learning. The challenges that we identified in our room was that COVID-19 and lockdown played a very big role in inhibiting effective co-production. One of our speakers, Karen, actually spoke about a pilot that they had with township economic development, whereby they used different methodologies in order to engage with communities from the design to the implementation stage of the projects. And they found that actually, because it happened at a point where we were on a hard lockdown, it was difficult. So other methodologies were used in order to overcome this challenge, and such things such as the use of social networks in order to communicate with the communities were being used. So they found that as a very effective tool. Another challenge is lack of political will and legislative timeframes. So here, one of our speakers also spoke about how sometimes government would be interested in using co-production as a tool, but the issue is that there would be timeframes. So there's a time frame in which the project had to be completed, and also that the time in which they would want to engage the communities would be inconvenient for the communities. So you would find that it would be during the day where people were at work, and there would be, then people can't fully engage with that. And also skepticism because big projects ending up with being white elephants, and they're thus leading to poor involvement. And there's also dependency on municipal grants for projects, therefore leading to inadequate funding. There's also distrust because communities feel that their voices have not been heard in the past, and therefore, and also there's a lack of feedback in some projects that they were previously involved in, and they did not hear or get to understand of the final outcome of the projects. There's also an issue of alignments or misalignments of policies. There needs to be an alignment of policies because there are policies in place and laws that are in place which would facilitate effective co-production, but they contradict each other and they lead to poor outcomes. There's limited resources for implementation of co-production, and also that the forums of engagement for engagement and laws are in place. However, the key hindrance is implementation. There are a lot of learnings that were found in our group from the discussions that we had with our speakers. And these include that it is important to recognize that co-production is different to activities like consultation, which is a common term that we use, engagement, and co-production and co-design, because it does not just ask for people's ideas and insights, it also includes their skills and expertise. Communities are always willing to participate, and stakeholders are willing to engage and be part of the solution. And here, one of our speakers actually spoke about how they actually did recognize that there was some reluctance from the communities to participate because of past experiences, and this was voiced out. However, because communities want to see the betterment of their communities and for the future, they do still, even though they are a bit reluctant, they would still participate in these projects. We also found that we must redefine the way we think of public participation, because consulting, in the way we understand it, it seems to undermine democracy. The communities can own the process and not rely on government if co-production is used. So co-production is also not just one-dimensional. It is a process that includes co-design, that means including communities from the onset of the project when the design is still being formulated, co-decision making, co-delivery, and co-evaluation, where when the project is finalized and the committee is still in a space where they can still make their comments and evaluate the outcome. The failure of LED is evident and in dysfunctional programs and projects often funded by governments. For co-production to become part of the way we work, we need to create a culture where certain values and behaviors are the norms. And these are ownership. We need to diffuse power and make sure that the community owns the projects, understanding and support of co-production by all, a culture of openness and honesty. There needs to be clear communication and a culture where people are valued, respected, and a commitment to sharing of power and decision-making with the citizens. Co-productions will be successful if we review the existing terminology, such as viewing communities as beneficiaries rather than partners. The desired outcome of co-production is improved economic future and quality of life. Okay, as a way forward, in our room, these are the factors that we looked at. We found that we need to improve social contracts and strengthening trust within the communities. We need to give communities a sense of ownership, and we need to respect and value all people's views. Inclusive economic transformation is nearly impossible with the current framework on participation. We need to move more towards co-production. As explained previously, this means including communities from the onset right through to the end of the project. And the public sector has a responsibility to formulate legislation and policies which are adaptable and flexible. Inclusive local economic development is more of a process than an outcome. Co-production encourages coordination and improved communication and transparency, competency building, employment, capacity development, and investment attraction. So in the long run, co-production minimizes or avoids unnecessary conflicts because the community is involved from the onset till the very end of the project, thus alleviating any conflicts that might result in the outcome of the projects. Thank you.
Thank you, Anele. May I invite group room 3?
Good morning, everyone. Yesterday, Prashina Mohangi and myself, Anne Limtembu, we facilitated Breakaway Room 3, titled Promoting Healthy Cities, Balancing Community Needs with Planning as well as the Environment. So with our breakaway room session, we focused on defining what a healthy city is, and it is designed in a way in which it promotes, well, it's designed and produced in a way that enables people to be who they want to be. It does not discriminate, and it embodies inclusivity. It is focused on the well-being of all its citizens, whereby they have access to adequate healthcare and resources, and prioritizes mental health to ensure functional relationships and environments for people to socialize and work in. A healthy city is characterized by sustainability and innovation, whereby there's a balance between the social, economic, and environmental aspects of a city and use of ecological innovation. A healthy city has the following qualities. 1, a clean, safe, high-quality physical environment. 2, a stable and sustainable ecosystem. 3, a strong, mutually supportive and non-exploitative community. 4, public participation in and control over the decisions affecting one's life, health, and well-being. 5, meeting the basic needs for all. 6, access to a wide variety of experiences and resources and possibilities of multiple contacts, interactions, and communication. 7, a diverse, vital, and innovative economy. 8, encouragement of connectedness with the past, heritage, and other groups and individuals. 9, a city form compatible with and enhancing the above. 10, an optimum level of appropriate public health and sick care services for all. And finally, high positive health status and low disease status. And this was very important to just give an overview of what a healthy city actually encompasses. But before we proceed in ways in which we can promote it, I'd like to request for Xolisa to share a video of how the actual term or how the actual concept of a healthy city came about.
The majority of human beings are now living in urban areas. This trend will continue, with 6 in 10 people living in towns and cities by the year 2030. More people are migrating permanently to urban areas. However, looking beyond the attraction of imposing skyscrapers and big city lights, today's cities often put human health at risk. The urban poor are most affected by the health hazards of urban life and often suffer from lack of access to healthcare services and a wide range of communicable and non-communicable diseases. The urban rich are also affected by a sedentary lifestyle, leading to health problems such as obesity, diabetes, and cardiovascular diseases. Both rich and poor are subject to stress and psychosocial problems in the cities.
Urban health across the WHO Eastern Mediterranean region is increasingly challenging. Unplanned urban growth puts populations at increasing risk of poor quality of life, poor health coverage, poor infrastructure and sanitation, and unsafe drinking water. Urban populations are also more vulnerable to disasters and are at higher risk of communicable and non-communicable diseases like heart disease, diabetes, and cancer. They are more vulnerable to injuries and early death than rural populations.
To address the ever-increasing concerns about urban health, the World Health Organization has developed a health promotion initiative known as Healthy Cities Project. A healthy city is one that is continually creating and improving the physical and social environments and strengthening those community resources which enable people to mutually support each other in performing all the functions of life and achieving their maximum potential. Healthy city projects have 6 characteristics in common: commitment to health, political decision-making, intersectoral action, community participation, innovation, and healthy public policy. Healthy cities projects, through intersectoral action, facilitate a process through which organizations working outside the health sector change their activities to contribute more to public health. There are many examples of healthy cities projects where abandoned old factories were converted into recreational facilities, or unhealthy garbage piles transformed into community waste management centers. Healthy cities projects are based on the philosophy that the roots of ill health lie in social and economic factors.
People who live in urban slums and disadvantaged areas are in a particularly vulnerable situation and often have little access to social services, including health. Over 1/3 of the world's urban population lives in such areas. Health equity and social justice in provision of basic services have become now the guiding principles for sustainable development initiatives. The importance of health equity has been emphasized by the member states of WHO in the Rio Political Declaration on the Social Determinants of Health, which was adopted by the World Health Assembly at its 65th session in May 2012.
Healthy cities projects recognize and address many social determinants of health and place action related to them at the center of its agenda. Education, women's engagement, empowerment, housing, and income generation are among many healthy city initiatives.
In response to the urban health challenges in the region, the WHO Regional Office for the Eastern Mediterranean is supporting city planners in their efforts to strengthen intersectoral collaboration, assess health and social inequity, and take appropriate action under the umbrella of the WHO Healthy City Program. A regional healthy city network has been established with an interactive website that encourages city planners to increase the access of city dwellers to quality health, environmental, social and cultural services, advocate for effective partnership, community participation, and intersectoral action in local health planning and management, and learn from each other through sharing good practices, experiences, and challenges, and take action to meet the WHO criteria for designation as a healthy city. I strongly urge city planners and authorities to join the Healthy City Network and to register their cities in the website. Since its initiation by WHO in 1986, the Healthy City Program has inspired many city planners, globally and regionally, to make our cities healthier places in which to live. As the pace of urbanization accelerates, we need more than ever to make every city a healthy city.
Thank you, Polisa. I'll just go back to my presentation. So for our session yesterday, we focused on 3 key tenets in relation to promoting healthy cities, namely health and well-being, sustainability, as well as inclusivity, whereby each speaker, we had 4 speakers, namely Professor Bridge Maharaj, Professor Catherine Sutherland, Mr. Manfred Shrink, as well as Professor Sophia Mugaru, and they all presented their lived experiences and their ideas of what a healthy city should constitute, whereby health and well-being are often overlooked in the design of cities and creating spaces that are conducive for human existence, and it is what planners must do and advocate for. This was the focus of our breakaway rooms, to actually consider all of the promotion of healthy cities and look at the challenges that are experienced within cities. In the initial presentation by Professor Brij Maharaj, he looked at the contradiction of Durban being the most livable city in South Africa, whereby he focused on the 20th NIRSA Quality of Life report, which ranked Durban as the most livable city in South Africa. This statistic, or this ranking, was supported by, or was evaluated according to the political and social environment, the economic environment, public services and transport, housing, education, recreation, and the natural environment. However, in his presentation, he argued that the ranking system is not always a true reflection of the challenges experienced in cities, namely housing, which is one of the major concerns that eThekwini municipality, as well as the city of Durban, experiences. Education is also another aspect that we need to look into or consider when we're looking at positioning Durban as the most livable city, as well as the political challenges that have been experienced in South Africa, considering the actions that occurred in July of this year. The second presentation by Professor Catherine Sutherland, she focused on planning, environment, and the co-production of knowledge and the possibilities of Durban's transformative riverine management program that she runs with her research team, whereby she looked at planning being more inclusive and open through the involvement of public and private actors in the production and use of spatial knowledge and practices in urban processes. She actually presented her lived experience with the research team, whereby they've really transformed and empowered communities in the approach of including them in all of their projects that they engage in, whereby they work hand in hand instead of explaining how planning works. They empower them with knowledge. They teach them how to map out their settlements and engage actively to a position whereby they are now more confident and assertive in the things that they want in terms of their informal settlements and how they want to be active partners in actually reshaping the standard of living that they're subject to and produce opportunities for themselves by moving closer to the city. The third presentation was by Mr. Manfred, whereby he argued that sometimes we as planners or we as professionals often focus on our specialized skills and our expertise, whereas sometimes we need to really go to the grassroots level and understand people and become one to actually overcome some of the challenges that people experience. That is the most fundamental way of empowering people instead of adopting a top-down approach. We need to look at things from a systematic perspective whereby they feel as if they are active people in the roles in which we reshape and redefine spaces, as well as creating or co-producing healthy cities. We need to work hand in hand to produce strategies that will have better coordination amongst the private and public sector to empower people and to also give them a more predefined role so that they can feel as important agents in terms of really transforming their position and becoming an active role player in the production or in the promotion of a healthy city. Lastly, Professor Sophia presented the Constitution of the World Health Organization, whereby she focused on health, mainly being the state of complete physical, mental, and social well-being, and not merely the absence of disease or infirmity. She broke down her lived experiences in Portugal, whereby she said that walkability and being able to just engage in an environment that is safe and really reflective of a healthy city is the most fundamental thing, where we can improve our overall well-being by engaging in not only the concepts that we learn about or we engage on, but actually living them to actually promote a healthy city was her focus. She gave us a good rundown on Lisbon and how it is shaped, how it has evolved. Obviously, there are challenges like in most cities, but the most important thing that we got from the overall presentations of all four speakers was how common certain themes and actions that have been taken were similar between the work that Professor Sutherland was doing, as well as Professor Sophia's understanding of what is happening in Lisbon was. And we saw a correlation that cities may be so far apart, but yet they run parallel in terms of how they think and co-produce spaces. And these are just the relevant links for the presentation, for the video that was played from the World Health Organization, which actively plays a huge role in advocating for healthy cities and promoting and producing healthy cities so that we can rectify the challenges that are experienced in cities. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Anele and Prashina. That was really a very informative presentation. May I invite Emmanuel?
Thank you very much, Program Director. Greetings, everybody. Yesterday, we had an interesting deliberations in room 4, where in the sub-theme was building resilient cities. I was co-chairing with Dr. Ayobami Popula from the University of KwaZulu-Natal, and we were ably assisted by the rapporteur, Mr. Eddie Muta. There were 4 presentations in room 4. First up was Dr. Patrick Kobina from the University of Melbourne in Australia. He was then followed up by Dr. Okunola from the University of Witwatersrand in South Africa. Misiwe Ntombela from the South African Cities Network was the 3rd presenter, and Dr. Iliasu from the University of Melbourne, Australia also presented. So what was the interest sort of remarks will be presented in the following few slides. We just thought that we give you a sense of how room 4 was run, which we had about 40 attendees. We had question and answer sessions, and these are the following key salient points from the presentation. From Dr. Kobina's presentation, his topic was the epistemology of the urban resilience multi-scale to planning, practical initiatives through theoretical lens. His objectives were to look at Africa vulnerability along a multi-scaled lens. He looked at a number of different topics that speaks to resilience. One was urban development in African cities, climate change risks in African cities, developing sustainable and adaptable African cities, finally, urban resilience multi-scale approach to city development. Some of the arguments advanced were that the rate of urban expansion is higher than the rate of population growth, and this is an unsustainable pattern of urban growth. He also touched on the fact that African cities are characterized by a contrast between the formal and informal settlements, and coupled with that, there's an increasing rate of unemployment. Common among some of the challenges within African cities were water shortages. And I think interestingly, he also mentioned that Africa is in the eye of the climate storm and that its cities remain the most ill-prepared and the most vulnerable globally. However, the impact is not the same across the continent. It varies, and particularly looking at some of the coastal cities wherein he unpacked some of the challenges from a number of African cities. In terms of the summary coming out of that presentation, there is a need to address a multi-scalar effect of climate change and urbanization through urban resilience, multi-scale conceptualization. And what does that entail? It emphasized the importance of urban planners to think across scales while simultaneously highlighting the salience of vulnerable communities in the planning process. And I think he also touched on the following, that urban planning offers important pathways and tools for addressing complications of climate changes in growing cities. I think one of the points that also struck me was that there seemed to be a democracy of resilience. And the question asked here was that, what if climate and its effect, and why a political party is not voted or lost on an election? I think the observation was that there isn't enough probably coming out of excuse me, political party manifestos that speak directly to the concept of resilience. The second presentation was from Dr. Okunola. The topic was community resilience to flood disaster in Lagos, Nigeria. He submitted that exposure of human settlements to flood risk is increasing as a result of climate change, development intensification, as well as population growth. Some of the arguments were that the flood resilience approach was not effective in the city of Lagos as a result of low level of preparedness and lack of awareness among residents on flood preparedness and mitigation strategies. The finding revealed that there was a low level of preparedness in terms of risk, vulnerability, and community capacity assessment. Obviously, you can't look at challenges alone without putting forward some of the prevention strategies, and some for flood prevention were timely and relevant information from the media about floods, as well as the presence of temporary shelter location in and around communities. He also mentioned that the least preventative strategies adopted in communities were provision of more green infrastructure, such as rain gardens, green walls, green roofs, and access to inclusive formal safety nets, such as government and humanitarian agencies. Summary takeaways from that presentation was flood preparedness measures need to be community-driven and risk-informed. Strengthening community flood resilience requires a process that is multi-sectoral and involves numerous actors. Lastly, local leaders are the key actors too, and their community footprints are critical to vulnerability management. The third presentation was Misiwe Ntombela from the South African Cities Network. Her topic was sustainable and resilient cities. She emphasized the importance of the integrated urban development framework imperatives in building the resilience of the poor and those in vulnerable situations, and reduce their exposure to climate-related extreme events and other economic, social, environmental shocks, as well as disasters. Some of the argument put forward was that the importance of an all-of-society approach, wherein we listen and facilitate knowledge creation, learning and innovation through partnership among all critical stakeholders. She submitted that young people, individually or in organized or semi-organized structures, are actively involved in finding innovative solutions to problems in their communities, and they have a rich history of exercising their voice in discussions about education, climate change, and politics. Summary points there was, it's important to put green on the urban agenda to ensure that we have an integrated system of planning around resilience. And importantly, space can heal, and planning plays a critical role in the space and earth healing processes. She mentioned some of the healing balms, like the use of non-motorized transport, ocean cleanup activities, as well as urban agricultural projects. Also, she mentioned that mental health and well-being are associated with special conditions. So I think it's quite important as urban practitioners that when we plan, we also consider health, as the speaker before me just alluded to the concept of health of the city. All in all, I think she called for an all-of-society approach, which is an imperative to collective resilience and sustainability. Final presentation was Dr. Iliasu, whose topic was building resilient cities through planning for urban growth. Some of the objectives was, what do we mean when we talk about resilience? He posed such question as, what's the current state of play in urban resilience? And he framed his presentation more as a discussion rather than a out-and-out presentation. And he also posed the question, how can we build resilient cities in Africa? The argument put forward in his presentation was that the notion of resilient cities is based on the capacity of cities to respond and adapt to changing circumstances. Challenges in poor urban settlements are intensified by mounting hazards associated with extreme weather events, lack of urban continuum, planning tools, and making cities sustainable and resilient to shocks and stresses. He also highlighted that communities on the periphery of cities often experience the most profound negative impacts from urban growth, and that in particular puts those populations at a greater risk. Summary points were that there's a need to address the root cause as opposed to the symptoms of unplanned urban growth. This will lead to multiple benefits and help each city to survive, adapt, and thrive in the face of the shocks and stresses it may face, and improve the development trajectory and well-being of its citizens. We also put forward that there is a need for proactive planning for urban expansion. This is essential to achieve inclusive and resilient urban growth for cities experiencing rapid urban growth in Africa. And I think one of the takeaways from Dr. Ilyasu that also struck me was a quotation that said, "Designing a city is beautiful, making it sustainable is great, but making it all of that and resilient is getting closer to perfection in urban planning." With that being said, thank you very much, Program Director, for the opportunity to report back.
Thank you very much, Emmanuel. I think that was also very comprehensive and interesting feedback. Climate change and resilience are important issues that are not only particular in the South African context, but obviously across the globe. And I think just having an overall perspective of, how cities respond and kind of work being done. Obviously, we as mankind have a lot to do with regard to looking after the earth, and obviously as the way we plan cities to be resilient in our attempts as well. But perhaps we're going to hear a little bit more of those issues coming from the panel. So Emmanuel, thank you for that presentation. It's time now for me to introduce the panel. And this morning's panelists are all ready. So without further ado, allow me please to introduce the panel that's going to facilitate this discussion this morning. So the panel itself is constituted of people from municipal backgrounds, from government backgrounds, from academia, as well as from the South African Local Government Association, SALGA. But I will introduce each one of them so that you understand the kind of context that they greet you in this morning and the role and the contributions that they have in terms of the topic for this year. So in introducing Adrian Peters, he has a BSc engineering degree and a postgraduate diploma in engineering from erstwhile University of Natal, now known as UKZN. He also has a BA from the University of Wales. He has 31 years of experience in municipal engineering, 12 years of which were spent as the city engineer of eThekwini municipality, and that in itself is a huge responsibility, as you will appreciate. From May 2014 to date, Adrian occupies the post of the Chief Strategy Officer, and that is that he's responsible for driving strategic programs across the municipality. The portfolio that he has includes the sustainability function, which includes resilience. So there we go, Emmanuel. We have someone on the panel that can also talk to resilience this morning. He has headed up the Secretariat to the City Planning Commission and is the focal point for the implementation of the district development model in eThekwini, although this is a national prerogative as well. He's a registered engineer, past Vice President of the Engineering Council of South Africa, past council member of the Built Environment, and a fellow of the South African Institute of Civil Engineering. He has two daughters, Taryn and Kathleen, who are also qualified civil engineers. And I'm wondering what having supper with that family would be like, but we're going to hear from Adrian shortly. My second panelist is Stephanie Chetty, and Stephanie Chetty is from National Copter. She is responsible for the implementation of the IUF, that is the Integrated Urban Development Framework, and the review of the IUDF and related policy instruments. She manages and coordinates stakeholder engagements to support the IUDF. She's also the program manager for small a town regeneration strategy and supports and coordinates international and local partnerships such as the BRICS Urban Forums, the World Research Institute, I beg your pardon. And she's also supporting localization of the Urban Development Agenda 2030 through oversight of the Sustainable Development Goals implementation. This morning, I'm pleased and happy to welcome Stephanie Chetty as part of the panel. The third panelist that I have invited to address us this morning is a gentleman by the name of Sanekola Futwa, and he is a senior manager in the built environment space, the South African Local Government Association at the National Office. He is a development strategist and a registered town and regional planner with some over 22 years of experience in senior management roles. He holds a master's in town and regional planning with a postgraduate diploma in project management. He's a community development activist and facilitator, and that's an interesting one for this morning's discussion as well. He's a performance manager, a specialist. He's a dedicated father and a family man. So you're most welcome this morning, Mr. Futwa, and thank you for joining the panel this morning. The last panelist that I have invited to join us as part of this comes from academia, and he's none other than Dr. Mqwino himself from the University of UKZN. As I said, he's a faculty member there. He is also one of the founder and one of the first and pioneer members of the eThekwini Municipal Planning Tribunal. And that tribunal was set up as a result of new emerging planning legislation in the country. And he has contributed significantly to the decision-making around planning applications in the city. So Professor Mqwino, you're most welcome, and thank you for being part of the panel. So before I start with a host of questions, I want to just basically say and have a few opening statements, okay? Co-production. And when we started, we asked what was co-production. But coming out of this morning's feedback, and I just picked up on 3 or 4 of them, just as kind of takeaways and to set the kind of scene for this morning's discussion. Firstly, co-production is different from public participation. Rather, it also includes the skills and the activities of the communities and its people. I think that was perhaps one of the most, for me, important statements that was made this morning. But accompanied with that, planning is a local affair. And I think that came fundamentally, and we heard it yesterday when the acting city manager addressed us, and he said that local knowledge was perhaps so important to realize the delivery of goods and services and a relationship between government and its people. So again, like I'm saying, planning is a local affair, okay? I think importantly, what also came out for me is that while we were talking about co-production, the notion of transformed communities was also made mention of. And I think that while people and governments work together, the transformation of communities and people living in those areas really balances and brings to the fore for governments positive and more efficient ways in which it delivers goods and services. So the words that came to mind in the very first slide that was put up when Kayla and Sam reported back, they used words that came from participants yourselves around collaboration, participation, collectiveness, and integration. And I think that sets now a very, very interesting and a great platform for discussion purposes for this morning. So I'm going to ask the panel that when they respond to us, that they basically put on their cameras, and they're most welcome to switch off their cameras thereafter, mainly because of the IT issues that we are having, not only in South Africa, but I think it's across the globe as well. So Mr. Peters, if I were to start with you and to ask you a question in the municipal space, okay? So considering that co-production looks at the delivery of municipal goods and services, can you unpack for us in past projects or current projects, this relationship of co-production, how has it worked, if it has? And what are some of the opportunities of this partnership? What were some of the challenges? And obviously, you know, you may use all the examples that you would want to speak about this morning. So if I could hand over to you, just to give us some kind of response from a municipality in the delivery of goods and services, and how co-production has actually worked in the municipal space. Thank you.
Well, firstly, good morning. I think you're the program director. Good morning to you, and good morning to all the colleagues that are involved in this rich discussion. I think it might be good afternoon or good evening, depending on where you are in the world.
Colleagues, if you'll indulge us for a moment, we are going through load shedding. Participants, may I beg your indulgence, please? Load shedding in eThekwini just starts at 10 o'clock, particularly in this space. So if you'll just allow us a few moments just for people to rejoin. Thank you. Colleagues, perhaps as we wait maybe for Mr. Peters to rejoin us, maybe if we can ask Stephanie. Stephanie, are you able to hear us?
Yes, Leka, I am. I'm not going to be able to switch on my camera because I'm still in load shedding. Okay. Am I audible?
Yes, you are. Can we perhaps then, while Adrian rejoins us, perhaps start with you with regards to the discussion that we're having this morning, right? So the examples that you perhaps are aware of in co-production that's being undertaken in the country, and your background perhaps will also allow you to maybe talk to some examples outside South Africa. What are some of those opportunities, challenges, and learnings that you have identified? And also, so let me ask you that as a first question, Stephanie.
Thank you very much, Leka, and good morning to colleagues. Good afternoon and good evening if you're connecting around the globe. So that's a quite interesting one. As we reflect on co-production and coming from national governments, my overall role and responsibility is to manage the urban policy for South Africa called the Integrated Urban Development Framework. As you know, that we have inherited the apartheid regime in terms of spatial planning, and the objective of the IUDF is to create a space of livable, safe, integrated, economically inclusive, and globally competitive cities and towns where residents actively live and participate. Coupled with that is to achieve the integration of spatial integration, inclusion and access, growth and governance, and to work with communities, all of society, government, business, academia, etc. So one of the challenges that we have faced in implementing such a national policy is that the way the structures of our cities and towns have been developed has really created a very deep social and economic divide. But we've sought to try and assist in some of this. As you know, that the IUDF is aligned to the Spatial Planning Land Use Management Act and in line with the NDP, the National Development Plan. So we've done this through the City Support Program, which is administered through National Treasury that assists metro municipalities. And we've done this through the intermediate city municipalities that is administered through to COCTA. And the Small Town Regeneration Program that's administered through to SALGA, with COCTA supporting them. So some of the initiatives and the challenges that we see is that we still face this deep worsening of exclusion, and where we see social exclusion and really growing. So what we've tried to do is to try and see how we can involve an inclusive growth opportunity and innovation around the urban spaces and rural spaces through co-creation, through the IUDF, and activating partnerships within the IUDF and championing certain policy levers to bring about our strategic priorities associated with that being integrated urban-rural linkages, urban resilience, and urban safety. So some of the success factors that we've actually initiated is one being the most important one is through the district development model. We find that the integrated urban development framework is the vehicle to harness integration through the cities and towns, and utilizing the IUDF and the way it's structured to bring in voices of civil society, business, academia, to all be actively involved in the whole of government approach. We've got many other initiatives, Leka, that we have also started, but let me pause there to bring it back to you and give others an opportunity, and I'll take over later. Thank you.
All right, so thank you, Steph. Just in handing over to somebody else, and maybe a question that I want to ask you before we move on, is that one of the presentations in this morning's session talked to, where does co-production fit in? And clearly, people talked to a host of plans, whether you were talking about in the South African context to something like the IDP, the Integrated Development Plan, whether you were talking about spatial development frameworks, or whether you were talking to something like a very low order plan of a functional area plan, etc. You're talking now about the Integrated Development Framework Plan, right, the IUDF. Clearly, it's at a very, very high level. So I'm just trying to understand from a point of co-production, how does one go out to the communities and talk to them around such a high level plan, considering, these are ordinary people that are really looking to receive goods and service in the quickest and most efficient way. So perhaps you want to answer it now, or you want me to go back to Adrian and come back to you. But that is a question that I'd like to have answered by yourself, please.
Thank you. Considering that the
Stephanie, maybe I could just say to you that, sorry, Steph, I think
development framework is a national policy imperative. And
sorry, Stephanie.
this down to municipal level or community level is the introduction of the implementation plan 2020-2025 that really delves in and focuses in on how do we
Sorry,
bring
Stephanie, I think we have a
society.
problem with your sound
Hi.
again. I think we're having problems with your sound, Stephanie. Can I perhaps just give you a few minutes to maybe revert? Because I think, I don't know whether it was only me, but clearly the sound was inaudible.
Am I audible now?
Yes, that's better.
Thank you so much. Apologies, colleagues, for that. So I was saying the Integrated Urban Development Framework has an implementation plan 2020-2025, and it looks at involving municipalities and communities down to a community level through various aspects of bringing about inclusion, access, and co-creation within the space. And it looks at how do you champion and identify champions to initiate spatial transformation and urban development and integration. It looks at how to better partner and bringing government down to a level of better authentic partnering, and looking at seeding action, doing smaller work within communities and municipalities. And this was also reflected yesterday through Sizwe's presentation on, I think it was Breakaway 4. And then also just enabling learning and learning reviews, peer learning reviews from international perspectives. One of the initiatives that we've actually sought to bring about
Stephanie, I think we've lost you now. So I think, Lisa, maybe if we could just, Stephanie, are you back, or
the enhancement of the small developmental government through side plan with them is to look at how do we strengthen as a national. Hi, Leka, I think we can proceed with the other candidate. My network is really bad.
Yeah, I was going to suggest that maybe we just come back to you, but that's fine. So we'll catch up with you in a few moments. Thanks, Steph. Thanks for that. So Adrian, I want to go back to you, and perhaps you want to pick up on where you left before the load shedding, now that you have that you're back.
Yes, thank you very much, and sincerest apologies for that. I tried to have a backup plan, but clearly the backup plan didn't work very well as well. So I just wanted to put on the table a few observations. As I said, the discussion that I was listening into this morning was quite rich, and you know, it's perhaps in some respects it's you know, I don't want to be preaching to the converted. But I think the reality is that if you look at where we are as a globe, not just as a city or a country, the sort of crises that we are facing currently, and the sort of crises that are around the corner, are crises that call for solutions that go beyond the capacity and capabilities of formal structures like governments, and especially in large cities. The ask, given the current and future realities, is an ask that goes beyond the municipality. It's an ask of all actors and all participants in the lives of cities. So that calls then for and that is why in metropolitan cities we don't talk about municipal plans, we talk about city plans, because the municipality is but one role player in that process. So this then calls for a new relationship with stakeholders, because it's not about a a sort of passive society. It's about a society that needs to take action themselves to chart their own futures and their own lives and work collaboratively with other stakeholders. So these relationships that are called for are relationships that need to shift away from dependencies, from sort of welfare approaches. They've got to be different in nature. They've got to be collaborative and developmental. But the big question is how do you do that in an environment where there's growing distrust? And again, this is not a South African phenomenon. It's not an eThekwini phenomenon. I think globally there's lots of evidence and there's a lot of research that suggests that there's growing distrust between governments and people in general. And now in that sort of context, you need to find a way to work together. So, and trust is not just about cultural trust or social trust. It's also about institutional trust. So we've got to find a new way to work together in an environment where we're becoming increasingly polarized. And of course, this whole situation gets exacerbated by the modern environment that we're in, where we now have everybody just about has access to real-time information, and the sort of gatekeeping of information and intelligence that used to happen through elected leadership, who used to be the only source of the truth, all of that's fallen away. So people are becoming much more aware, much more informed, much more exposed to a whole range of different opinions and interpretations. And it really calls into question, the extent to which we still need representation, as it's conceived now and has been practiced from many, many years ago. Now, if you want to get people's opinion on any subject matter, you don't need to process it via some representative who then possibly distorts the message, and then you get a long chain of feedback. You can get instantaneous feedback on any issue whatsoever. So it really calls into question, and I think we've got more aware and more informed constituencies anyway. So in the South African context, we've obviously got some very huge stresses in our society, perhaps relatively speaking, more than in some other cities. And you look at these in terms of poverty, unemployment, inequality, and then you've also got these exacerbated by issues of factionalism and corruption. And so theoretically, the role of leadership is to reduce the tensions in society. The mayor of Madrid at a conference that I was conveyed that very, very eloquently. And she said any society can only tolerate so much of tension. And so there's certainly an inordinate amount of tensions in perhaps in the world and then certainly in the city. And we've got to look at how we deal with that. And so the starting point is really around how you build social capital. And so some of the initiatives that we're looking at within the city is how do we create and provide for institutional structuring that puts government in the space of people. I think as municipalities and organizations grow, ironically, they become more physically distant from communities. And so we've really got to look at how we put them, we reduce the physical distance, if not all the other distances that exist between communities and government. And so coming specifically to the question, Leka, and I'm sorry, it was a bit of a long route. I just wanted to put some points on the table. Some of the initiatives that we have put in place in eThekwini, and I think this, I don't know if any of the discussion centered around the maturity of democracies and how does that feature as a key factor. But with respect to involving communities in service delivery, I think you might have heard about our Zibambele program, where we've used communities and we've got involved with communities in dealing with road maintenance issues. Our Sihlanzemvelo program, which is our stream cleaning program. And for many years, we've been running cooperatives and cooperative programs. We've also, through COVID-19, had partnerships with NGOs and also with the medical fraternity around dealing with the homeless problem in the city, as well as the drug problem that some of these homeless people find themselves exposed to. We've also had partnerships with Shack Dwellers International, and through our 100 Resilience project and one of the RBOs in that project, we've got a project with Shack Dwellers International dealing with data and community-held data in particular that can help us with the planning of projects. Our long-term development framework has also been a product of a partnership with various stakeholders, and there are ongoing engagements with these stakeholders around taking those partnerships forward. We've also used things like deprivation index to understand, and certainly in our Zibambele program, what worked well is the self-identification of the poorest of the poor, and making sure that the program was run administratively and not politically, making sure that we've had exit strategies, etc. I think what didn't work, and it's an issue that we need to wrestle with moving forward, is how do we build relationships with communities as government, as distinct from relationships with communities that are built by political parties. I think in the maturity of our democracy, there's still work to be done in that space, so that the trust in government becomes the focus, and in the first instance, and certainly administratively, something that we manage moving forward, as opposed to the trust in a particular political party, which then may entail processes of interference around how beneficiaries are identified, etc. So the integrity of the process, I think, becomes very important, and it's being seen to be a government process rather than a political party process. Yeah, so just two other points quickly. Just to say that our mayor, outgoing mayor, also had an initiative around co-development, co-creation, and that's around building a social enterprise economy with some kind of social contract, ESD fund, procurement reforms. And these are things that we are also looking at how we take that forward. Let me just stop there, Leka. Thank you.
All right. Thanks, Adrian, for that contribution. You know, the important point that you made there was that how do we distinguish this relationship that is built by government and obviously, you know, separated from that, which is a politically established relationship. And I think in planning, you know, it's so important that we also strike that balance. So thank you for that input. But just before I move off to my next panelist, I just want to ask you, because you would have read in the chats, and I'm just picking up one by the side of my eye now, to say that, you know, at what point of service delivery should we begin this relationship? Okay, is it at the outset of a project? You know, when we have a definite plan because communities want you to come with something, or do they want you to come with something? And then, you know, what is the buy-in and how is the rest of the, how does it unfold then? So maybe before I let you go, if you could perhaps just give us your take on that. When does that relationship start in particular?
Yes, thank you very much, Leka. I think the issue before us is a bigger issue in just service delivery. We have a responsibility to build social capital. We have a responsibility, and I heard some speakers mentioning this earlier. We have the responsibility to give everybody the sort of environment that will enable them to be the best versions of themselves. And so this is not about projects, and it's certainly not about the implementation of projects. It's about getting into communities, building social capital, building trust, understanding what makes a difference in the lives of communities and how they can empower themselves and how they can contribute to being developmental, goes beyond projects and project implementation in particular. So I think, and it comes back to the maturity of the democracies, as I said earlier. I think in more mature democracies, there's a greater acceptance of that reality, and there's a more intensive, there are more intensive efforts around how that is done. In democracies that are less mature, where there's some level of gatekeeping and where there isn't that distinction between political party interventions and government interventions, these things become a bit more problematic, and we tend to focus on project engagement and consultation, I think, as some people said earlier. So the short answer for me is that the sort of challenges that we're going to face in the future are challenges that require everybody in that space to come together and work together. And that means that we've got to build capital. We've got to build the ability for people to make the changes that they require in their own lives. And so it can't be a project-specific intervention, and it certainly can't be restricted to the implementation phase of projects. Thank you.
Thanks, Adrian. Thank you for that submission. Very interesting points being made there. And obviously, you know, I'm just looking at what's happening on the chat, and I'm hoping that my colleague Anela is going to help me with some of the questions coming through on the chat. Adrian, if you wouldn't, if mind, don't leave us at the stage, please, because there are questions that are coming through, and I'd like, you know, your feedback on it. So perhaps if I could then move on to Professor Mtunu from the University of UKZN, and to basically set the scene to say that, you know, sitting on the Municipal Planning Tribunal, you see actual applications coming through, okay, for consideration of the municipality. And often you would find that some of the issues coming through are really based around infrastructure. So, you know, they would maybe object to a development on the basis that their understanding is that there is a lack of that infrastructure. Now, whether it's hard engineering infrastructure, your water, wastewater, electricity, etc., or roads, or whether it's your soft infrastructure, your schools, your places of worships, etc. How do you consider this in this decision-making space? So how do you actually ensure that communities' objections or concerns are put to bed when the municipality or when the Municipal Planning Tribunal takes that decision? So Professor Dr. Mtunu, if I could ask that of you in your space on the Municipal Planning Tribunal.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes, we can. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you for this, Aleka. Yeah, I wished I had, you know, I could speak from an academic point of view how we would unpack this concept of co-production in an academic space. But yeah, having been in the MPT, I think we rather worked collectively. We received applications, and we evaluate them. You know, so they in that process there is an opportunity for the community to voice their objections to the application, and we give the applicant a chance to respond to those issues, concerns, and then the planner who's presenting the application also gives input, and then we decide whether, you know, the reasons or the concerns were addressed adequately, or if not, the application, you know, is basically that issue is sent back for the applicant to really respond to the issues raised. So that's the extent of participation. Of course, the notices are sent so that people can be aware of what is going on and what's the intention of the applicant. And then on that basis, they respond, you know. I guess the absence of any objections means nobody has an issue. I'm not sure about that, but basically that's what it means. If there is no objections, means people in the area are happy. I'm not sure. So
Maybe
from the,
yeah, okay, carry on, sorry.
hello?
Yes, no, please proceed.
No, I'm just saying that from an objection to a planning application point of view, that's more or less how we respond. There is space for the community to participate, to air their views or concerns. So the process is inbuilt. I wanted to take a different tact, to this, and say that it seems to me that this concept of co-production is part of a long lineage of reformism in planning. You're talking about Paul Davidoff, and his advocacy planning. You're talking about John Turner's idea of self-help. You're talking about Patsy Healy and communicative action. So planning has been trying to get closer to the community all these years. My main concern is that the status quo is too entrenched. There are interests that are involved that are more powerful, that influence what we do. Everything revolves around the buying and selling of stuff. And urban land is being fragmented to the smallest spaces. So unless a point that was made earlier about the importance of shifting the power relations, unless that happens, co-production is going to go the way of advocacy planning and all those reform attempts that have been, done over the history of planning. The type of overall overhaul of the system that is required, I'm not sure it's at hand. I'm not sure we are ready to really engage the way co-production demands us to engage. And also there's this issue that was raised just now about the capacity, the need to build the necessary capacity in the communities, that we deal with. I think that's going to take a long time, because planning there seems to be following a different logic. Development, rather, seems to be following a different logic altogether. We hardly received planning applications from the townships, but we all know development is taking place on a daily basis there. So whether that's lack of knowing what needs to be done in terms of supplying, or submitting plans to them, or it's a question of, they don't know, I don't pay more rates, that's cool. And the neighbors are not going to tell on you because sooner or later they're going to be doing the same thing. So it seems there is a different logic, that drives development in the townships that the planning systems are not speaking to. So yeah, let me stop there with those observations.
Yeah, thanks, Doc. I think you make, firstly, obviously, going back to your experience on the Municipal Planning Tribunal, and public participation obviously is an element of co-production, but the extent to which obviously communities involve themselves in those plans that give rise to that application is perhaps something that maybe we need to relook at. And I think I take your point also that, you said that planning is trying to get closer to its communities, and the status quo, needs an overhaul. I think that's fundamental for what you're actually trying to say. And you're questioning, can that actually be a reality, or are we entrenched in the past? Having said that, I think earlier on you would have actually also heard that the youth, particularly in the Riverine presentation that we had this morning, that the younger communities are starting to get involved in this social capacity or capital, social capital, in building social capacity, capital of their communities and getting involved, etc. So maybe, you know, coming from academia, perhaps is there an opportunity that via and through the syllabus, and maybe you may say that it's theoretical, but perhaps is there a practical way that we could perhaps entrench some of these, you know, new thinking, new thoughts in terms of your the teachings that are actually undertaken by the universities and the institutions?
Oh, that's a good question. Thanks. Yeah, part of the teaching that we do involves inviting specialists like people in this audience to come and talk to, you know, address our students about their latest projects, approaches, etc. And also we do site visits, you know, depending on where we are welcome, we go. And then, you know, a presentation is made about whatever project is going on within that company or municipal space. So, and mind you, we have a limited period of time within which to do this before exams and all of that. So the practical side of things is for our program only comes in when they have finished the whole degree, and then they do the so-called in-service training. Otherwise, the participatory aspect of planning is limited to the theoretical presentations that we do, making students aware of this approach and that approach and that approach. So yeah, it's basically limited. We don't have enough time in our curriculum to include, you know, those aspects. And it takes time, you know, to even introduce a new module around what Mr. Mbele mentioned, I think yesterday, that we need to change our curriculum to speak to the current issues, you know. But yeah, I still maintain my positions that the status quo is too entrenched. I'm not saying it in a bad way. I'm just saying that, you know, we are so used to working the way we do. Yeah.
No, look, I take your point, but obviously, you know, going forward, and, you know, now that we need to really think out the box, and seriously we do, you know, for far too long, planners have been running on the spot. And I'd say it for most, you know, planners and the kind of plans we do, they just need something that's different. And perhaps, you know, it starts really at the institution's doorstep. But perhaps we'll take that discussion slightly later, because I do realize that there are questions in the chat box that are coming through, for which obviously I would like you to participate just now. But if I could perhaps just take my last panelist, that is Mr. Futwa from Salga, and to basically paint the picture that, you know, municipalities, and you've heard me say this so often, and I'll say it again, are creatures of statute. So they basically give effect to legislation, whether it's municipalities, but then you also get the different spheres of government across the world. There are so many different ways in which these spheres are set up. But in this South African context, obviously there's provincial and there's national spheres as well. Again, you know, like I'm saying, they are also bound by statutes. Having said that, right, and now wanting to move into possibly a new space of creating this co-production, do you think that we have, or what are the institutional mechanisms that allow this co-production to happen? Or do you think our institutional mechanisms need to change to become more innovative to actually allow this co-production to happen? So if I could ask Mr. Futwa to perhaps respond to that question.
Thank you very much, Lika. I hope I'm audible.
You are.
Good afternoon, colleagues, and good morning to colleagues that are in the South. My name is Zanokolo Futwa. I think to try and attempt to answer your question, I would perhaps answer it in 5 key points. That would help to give context to the institutional mechanisms that exist and that could also be considered. Firstly, the first point that I would like to just reinforce, which is a point that also came up strongly yesterday, is around how co-production is understood and institutionalized by planners or through the processes emanating from the actions of planners. And secondly, to try and deal with this question from the perspective of whether co-production institutionalization within South Africa, the South African planning context is happening, what mechanisms or tools support that. And some of the tools that I'm going to talk to, which are tools that are found in South African municipalities, have application and replication elsewhere in the world. I would try as much as possible, where possible, to just link to some of those that are similar tools that are utilized elsewhere in the world, but in South Africa, we've tried to legislate and regulate some of them. And then thirdly is to look at why co-production is important and necessary to strengthen, particularly the effectiveness of planning, and with a view to making us as planners begin to assume our important role in the value chain of helping society to solve important social, cultural, economic, and political problems that stride the work of a planner every day. And then to also look at what are the key focus areas that could facilitate this, and then to give some of those examples. If I can start with what emanated from the discussions yesterday, it is clear that co-production as a concept in planning, particularly in urban planning, even though it's been a concept that has been applied in other disciplines for much longer than we have experimented with it in planning, is something that we have not arrived at a universally shared definition. However, there's a set of things that are beginning in the body of literature that we have seen coming up since Whitaker, particularly around this, that begins to consolidate a set of key concepts that we find in planning, and particularly in the language of planning communication across the globe. And those relate to, in respect of this, collective planning, and the need to ensure that we are able to do things together and to express and embrace diversity. And that diversity is diversity in different levels. It's diversity in the voice, it's diversity in the economic classes that occupy and receive the benefits from the work of a planner and occupy their spaces in rural and urban spaces, as well as addressing important notions of humanity, such as justice, as well as social cohesion. And these are quite important issues in the work of a planner, because in the life that we live, planners have played significant roles on both sides of the right and wrong. If I draw examples to what is happening in the Middle East, what has happened in South Africa, what has happened in South America, you would realize that the role of a planner, particularly regional planners, has been over time been utilized a great deal in re-engineering societies. We can do that to the extent that we are solving problems, or sometimes we're creating problems. depending on what is the ideological lineage of your planning theories. So it's important that as we embrace this new concept of co-production, we are able to align ourselves as planners with the emerging new thinking in the globe of a global citizen, a globe that we share together, a globe that we have common interest, common liabilities, as well as common responsibilities to make sure that we sustain it. Because if we don't do so, all of us are going to suffer the consequences. And we've seen that emerging through climate change, for example. We've seen how disaster, for example, undermines all of those limited and narrow views about what we do and silo planning. Also, it is important to also start to ensure that we begin to build a better future that is built on the importance of humanity as a core value across the board. So our plans and our planning ethoses need to then be influenced by just transitions or thinking around that. There are many reasons why this becomes important. It is important particularly because resources in the world are unlimited. Sorry, they are quite limited. We are working with natural resources, with financial resources, with resources in the form of even the human capital that are limited. Therefore, it is important to ensure that we harvest and harness cooperation. We harvest and harness the value add in collective and inclusive integrated decision-making, planning about futures that impact on people and that impact on people's aspirations, that impact on readjusting or re-engineering the society that we are through our plans. We have in South Africa, fortunately, if I then come back to your question, the advantage of accidentally, our history and our background has forced our legislators and constitutional drafters to take into account a lot of issues about the need to be accountable, the need to get everybody involved, meaning to be inclusive in our approaches, the need to ensure that there is diversity of voice and consultation. So if you go to our constitution, for example, in the context of South Africa, for those people that come out, if you go to our constitution that was adopted in 1996, in its own preamble, you would find that it begins to entrench these principles. For example, it talks of the need to ensure that we consult people and the need to ensure that communities are part and parcel of decision-making about their own governance. In the context of South Africa, there is this established understanding of the concept or the notion of a municipality, which, if I can build an imaginary picture, you can picture a triangle with a relationship between three sets of categories. The first category being the people that we go and choose or elect through a democratic voting system. We call them councillors. And the second category filled by people that we identify what needs to be done and who can be best able to do so, and then issue an application for people to apply for a position. We look at their CVs and say, Mr. Futwa is a qualified planner. He can be able to do a planning job. We appoint Mr. Futwa. And then the third part, which is often the part that we don't pay significant attention in practice, is a part that is entrenched in our legislation and regulatory framework in South Africa, which is communities. So there is no municipality out of our 257 municipalities that is not constituted in this relational matrix. And communities in each and every aspect of governance at local level and decision making they ought to be part of those processes through our operational mechanisms. So that is what has been envisaged in South Africa. And we have in South Africa also tried to make sure that municipalities are established in a manner that allows for involvement, particularly in planning, at all levels. There was a question earlier about at what point do we then regard the significance of the involvement of communities in a project, right from the conceptual stage, in my view. Because, for example, if you consider the instruments that we use in South Africa, there are 3 spheres of government. There's a national sphere, which is similar to other places, particularly in Africa, your Botswana, which creates national plans, and Ghana, as well as Burkina Faso. You have national plans, and we also have that. There's a set of those national plans and supporting instruments, which Stephanie was talking to, one of them, which enable us to provide a collective view of where we want to take the country to. At a provincial level, we've got an interpretation of the national thinking through provincial plans. And at a local level, we have a reinterpretation as well as influencing of the 2 layers of thinking in terms of where we want to take the country to. And there we have something we call integrated development plan, which is also a legislated requirement. These spheres, those that are not in, are interdependent, meaning in order to plan, prioritize, and allocate resources to priorities, there needs to be constant communication, horizontal and vertical, that is continuous. But that constant communication virtually and vertically and horizontal is something that over the years we have strived to achieve with limited success for many reasons. And to the extent that in some instances, we have made even a basic process of a need to plan together to be something that we force. We went and wrote it in a law, Chapter 5 of the Systems Act. Even before that, we had envisaged the need to do so. We had put together a legislation that forces stakeholders that work with the state, inside and outside, and particularly inside the state, to work together in a legislation we called the Intergovernmental Relations Framework and Cooperation Act. And all of these, their aim were to facilitate integration, to facilitate consultation, to facilitate participation, to facilitate meaningful engagement, to facilitate a redress of a past history where there was a lot of instructive planning, not cooperative planning, which is a past that we wanted to move away because it limited innovation. It limited innovation. It deprived the opportunity of our plans to ensure that we can benefit from hearing how people in a rural context want to be developed and how people in their localities can actually be able to utilize their own energies to support the good intentions that government come up with. For example, in the delivery of a range of services, if we take, for example, housing, we had a challenge, which is a global challenge across the globe, of landlessness and houselessness. We looked at this at the beginning of a democratic dispensation in the mid-90s, and we came up with something that is involving the energy and the responsibilities from a user or from an end user, which is a community, a citizen, a household. And we allowed processes where they would come up and influence how government policy is formulated to enable a role for them to participate and to create a meaningful contribution to a solution of a big problem in society. through self-help mechanisms as well as supported or facilitated self-contributions to delivery of services. There is a range of these tools that, other than legislative instruments, that are critical and that assist in the context of South Africa and elsewhere to entrench co-production in planning. If I can just give a summary of a few, we have the legal instruments, and I think I'd mentioned those for the context of South Africa, but they also there in other countries. These would include, which apply both in this country and elsewhere, ward-based planning. In other countries, they call them local plans. Particularly in countries that are structured through regional configurations. Neighborhood plans or precinct plans, I think it was also mentioned yesterday. And these neighborhood and precinct plan enable cooperation between the state and a localized solution, which is a solution that may not necessarily be useful maybe for another locality, but it would work in that locality. It entrenches effective engagement and participation of our communities, well-established concepts which apply across the globe, such as triple Ps, public-private partnerships, which are enabling mobilization of resources, leveraging of resources between the state and outside and within the state, particularly for us with three spheres within the same state. In the context of South Africa, we've even legislated this one, integrated development planning, which is responding to the vast challenges of ensuring that there is a meaningful mechanism to effect and realize the imperatives of integration, inclusiveness, as well as involvement of all affected stakeholders and parties, particularly communities, in their local governance and planning. It is also important, particularly in a context of a country that's structured like ours, to also have something that we have tended to leave behind in planning. When I was a junior planner, we used to talk of hierarchy of plans. It is important to continue to have that mechanism because it has helped us as planners the world over to be able to manage how we want to solve long-term problems that apply globally, while we are able to also make sure that we deal with the uniqueness of short-term problems and localities. Principality of plans, national, provincial, and local government, and their integration and interdependence. In our country particularly, and I think this is something that, even though it is a solution and a tool that is being explored in South Africa, it has application in many other countries. And in fact, if you go to Singapore, they have exactly the same kind of concept, but they call it something else. We call it here the district development model. It is an approach, a planning approach, rather than a policy, that is aimed at promoting and encouraging integration, inclusiveness, involvement, participation of communities, as well as co-production of solutions using the limited resources that we co-share and are responsible for. And I think and that's one of the things that is an instrument that we are working on, and that is going to help us, particularly as we move into its consolidation within the 6th administration of local government in South Africa. And elsewhere, it can also be a useful tool to apply, and that would help, particularly the link between local governance or local authorities and their regional or national governments. Regional planning cooperation. Regional planning cooperation is an important tool that would enable us particularly in this country, and it's working very well in Zimbabwe. It is also similarly working very well in, if you go to South America, particularly Argentina, you would find that this is applied similarly, and it works very well with in terms of their cooperation there. And regions can also be beyond country boundaries. In this context, within a country in South Africa, we've got an example of this that is beginning to emerge, and it is something that I would encourage all planners present here and also internationally to try and connect with, because it would give them very good lessons. We call it the Karoo region, which is a multi-jurisdictional cooperation that is enabling diversity of voice, diversity of communities, cooperation, and an ecosystem of value chain cooperation, and that is being unlocked through that, which involves about 4 provincial governments. In these 4 provincial governments, there are 40 municipalities that participate in this initiative. And it is a region that is defined from a natural region, which is a biospheric region, the Karoo. In it, we've then put together communities that were struggling with similar kinds of strife, to be able to cooperate together, mobilize resources together, and then club up resources to deal with broader challenges of resource mobilization for unlocking infrastructure financing, unlocking economic planning at a regional scale, as well as unlocking opportunity at a local scale that informs regional development.
Mr. Futwa,
thank you so much. I think that's probably maybe the last point that I wanted to make, is that it is important that we embrace this concept, and it is a concept that suits the South African legal and regulatory framework already that we have established in the country. And as planners, perhaps like the acting manager of the city of eThekwini, we must begin to do 2 things. One is we need to entrench, in order for this to work, what is needed. Empowerment of communities through community education. I think it would help us so that we lift up the base with regards to information and intelligence for participation. And that cuts across a number of things, skill, technology, and so on. The second one is to give effect to the existing current legal and regulatory instruments. Thank you so much.
Yeah. Mr. Futwa, thank you very much for that, a very comprehensive response to the question. Clearly going forward, I don't think we in the South African context are doing too badly. However, I believe that, and this is just my thoughts, that, we're not true to co-production. And I think, public participation as well, it's tokenry. And I think because it's entrenched in law, it's really a tick box, thing that happens in our daily lives. But just overall from the panel side, I think observations from the panel, obviously that, we need to build a system of trust with our communities, but there needs to be a system of trust on both sides, of government as well as communities. Transparency possibly hasn't been our strongest skill as humanity. And maybe that's something that perhaps we need to start to be true to. Look, I think Stephanie had also spoken about, this DDM model. Clearly, it's something that in the South African context, it's starting to emerge. The response around, racing to basically meet a deadline for, a sphere of government without, drilling down into the community needs is also very much tokenry. So maybe we need to have a look at those kind of things. I think also going back to academia and starting to build these things into the curricula, to see how best emerging planners can actually be true to what possibly we haven't been exactly true to. And then obviously, you know, a legislation is one thing and being bound by legislation is one thing, but obviously having the opportunity to be all inclusive and be true to integration and be true to all the issues that you had actually raised. So I want to say thank you to the panelists right now, but what I want to do, and I would be failing in my duty if I didn't respond to the questions that were in this chat box. And I'm going to ask Anele to basically, you know, pick up a few of those questions, remembering that we wanted to finish by about 11:15. I think that we can push this to 11:30, but no later. So if I could just indulge you, and Anele, maybe just to pick up a few questions and to the panel. These are really to the panel. And the panelists, if you could please just, you know, if you believe you've got the answer to this or you have an input to it, please come forward and help answer these questions. So Anele, if I could just hand over to you to raise some of the chats in the box, please.
Thank you, Lekha. We have a few comments in the chat box and questions. So I'll just start with the comment made by Praveen Amar, who states that load shedding in South Africa is one indicator of the simple gap between these high-level discussions on topics such as co-production and such. If there is national policy that restricts service providers from contributing to the grid for no other reason than criticism, then co-production is dead from the start. Let's explore this more, because when we cannot or do not as planners, then we are part of the acquiescence that pervades governance, planning and development in South Africa, which has resulted in our failures in the states at all levels.
Okay. I think, yeah, Anele, there should be a discussion point around that, but I also, if you scroll down into the chat, you're going to find similar. So maybe if you could perhaps just pick out similar, or because I'm just worried if you have a discussion around that, you're not going to get through the rest of the question.
Okay, maybe I can just ask a question that was made by Nomusa Sibiya. How can we as local government diffuse the power relations amongst various actors in the co-production process? Some of the speakers spoke about empowerment. However, this requires additional budgets in the planning process. How do we advocate for additional budgets for the empowerment components?
Yeah, I think that's an important one. And maybe the panelists, perhaps Adrian, you want to respond to that. So how do we as local government diffuse power relations to the various actors in co-production process? Maybe Stephanie, whoever wants to go for it, please feel free.
Okay, Lekha, I'll give it a shot. So I think and I think you made this point, the key enabler for co-production is trust. So we've got to deal with the trust relations, and that should pave the way for better co-production. But when we talk about resources, and we talk about yes, in particular, more resources are required. I think what underpins that is thinking that says that these things are all events. So these are events that are going to happen, and in the course of a year, and budgets are required to do these things more properly. And I think I'd like to differ with that a little bit. Yes, of course, budgets are required, and programs are required, and resources are required. But I think the shift that's required can't be an event-based shift. Like much as I argued that it can't be a project-based approach, it can't be an event-based approach. So there shouldn't be a budget process and then you go and engage with the community, or planning process and then you engage with the community. I think what we've got to do is to look at how we build into our capacity the capability to do this on an ongoing basis. I think we've got the warning shots have been fired across our bows, particularly here in South Africa, that communities are calling for a different level of engagement. And so what we've got to do is really look at how we build this into everything that we do every day of the week and every week of the year. That's really what we need to be looking at. And that does call for perhaps a fundamental shift in how we deal with things like budgeting, I think all of us get locked into incremental processes around budgeting, but I think the situation is calling for us to pause and almost take a zero-based approach around where we're resourcing and are we in fact making the impacts that we need to make. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Adrian. Is there anyone else that wants to add to Adrian's points before I do? Anybody on this call?
Thanks, Leka. Can I give it a go? Thank you. I trust that I'm audible enough now.
Yes.
Thanks very much. I think just adding to what Adrian has alluded to, empowering communities in particular is not just reflecting on only the challenges that they're facing, but also looking at a holistic approach into including them in decision-making, actioning, design, and implementation. I think one of the imperatives of the RUDF is empowering the active communities and getting their voices heard in the planning processes, as well as in involving them in projects. Like Adrian said, it's not just about getting them involved in events, but from the beginning to the end. And a real good example of this is now through the district development model, to give them a voice where they're included in the planning, the design, the budgeting, and the implementation. Really another good example that we are doing as the National Department of Cooperative Governance is through one of our partnerships called Sibikwa Arts and Culture, is where we're looking at empowering the communities through a range of arts and culture initiatives to get their voices out there and to also empower women and youth in particular, and focus in on what are the needs associated in the communities, what are the challenges. And we've partnered with the Dialogue, the SAEU Dialogue facilities, and we'll be hosting a conference called Democracy in the Context of Culture. So really something to look forward to and get involved, because not just only recognizing projects, but how do we look at sustainable long-term funding and initiatives around that? Another good thing about the getting the voices heard was that we just recently hosted the Urban Fest through the South African Cities Network, National Department of Cooperative Governance, and SALGA as well, where we looked at the rebuilt cities and advocating for voices coming out from communities, from the three spheres of government, and really getting into the approach of how do we build an all of society where we listen, we facilitate, we hear what's coming out, and we co-create together by learning and innovating one another. I think that's really important, not only in the perspective from coming from government, but really involving that down to the three spheres of government at the same time. Thanks, Leka.
Thank you, Stephanie.
Can I add a bit?
Thanks. Yes, of course.
Oh, just maybe one more point without wasting time. I would think that one of the things that is important to unlock the objective and the desired outcome is to pay attention and properly plan, budget, and lead proper community education programs that are aimed at improving skills to engage technical processes, and providing skills as well as tools to navigate technology for engagement, particularly in times of internet and COVID. And lastly, promoting civil society and social movements to lead core community issues. If you think, for example, of the electricity protest issues that have been taken up by social movements, which have enabled government to start reducing the tensions between community and the distance between community and themselves. Unfortunately, this is a confrontational approach, but we need to then look at proactive approaches that prevent the confrontational approach. The confrontational approach from communities would only arise when there is frustration and when there is insufficient community education investment that enables communities to be able to play this significant role in co-production. Cases such as the Makana case, for example, are a good example of why we should be able to be proactive about these things and not to allow it to get to crisis level. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Mr. Futwa. I think that was really a comprehensive answer as well, and I'm hoping that that provides an answer or some kind of assistance to the person asking the question. I won't respond to that one mainly because I have a different thought, but what I would like to just take another question, Anile, so that we could move forward. Before we ask that question, Liswa, is it okay if we go to 11:30?
Sure, no problem at all.
Okay, thank you. Yes.
Okay, like the second question also refers to electricity. SALGA has been lobbying with NERSA and government on the matter for years now. Glad that they finally increased it to 100 megawatts, but unfortunately municipalities don't seem to want or be capable of taking advantage of this matter, perhaps due to lack of capacity or capability.
Yeah, look, these load shedding NERSA, electricity comments, I do understand, obviously, we're talking service delivery. I didn't want to focus on this particular issue per se, but I really wanted to get, the co-production paradigm out. So maybe if we could just park those ones, I just want to come back to the more planning succinct ones, so that not to be disrespectful, but obviously I want to flesh those ones out before I get someone to kind of respond to the NERSA issues, etc. Anile, maybe there's one from, I think it's called Sheena. I think the lady's Sheena.
Okay, Leka, there is the last coming there is from Sheena. I can just read that. Thank you, Leka, and to all panelists. I agree with Dr. Mchunu. We require a almost drastic overhaul of the status quo, which is possible over time if we consciously and proactively do so. Our institutional mechanisms needs to change for certain in the approach towards how we work, how we teach, factoring in time within academic durations to work in projects in direct co-production with local communities, private sector, government, etc. We do not invest enough time, resources, or develop the necessary capacity amongst ourselves to ensure that we active co-production. I liked what Adrian mentioned in that it is not just about projects, but about investing time in establishing relationships and establishing co-productive ways of asking how communities and what they want. The current status quo of work production does not allow us to actively co-produce. We need to simply insist we allocate enough time. Example, annually allocates 3 months whereby production moves from the office to the ground for planners at all spheres.
Yeah, look, as much as it's a comment, I think there's a lot of food for thought in that response, those comments. I think it's real, and I think that planners themselves need to basically review the kind of tools that we have in shaping communities and our relationship with communities going forward, right? Regarding these questions around these energy efficiency and the NERSA issues, is there anyone on the panel that wants to perhaps respond to it, maybe some of the principles around it, but in particular, anyone that wants to say something? Zano?
Okay, just to attempt to do that, I see, I've just read the chat box as well, and I see that my colleague Zodidi has begun to throw in some of the things. Perhaps to help the audience, what is the problem? The problem is planning for a sustainable energy supply and ensuring that there are co-production models in resolving the current energy challenges in South Africa. That is a planning question and a problem statement. How we have dealt with this, which then comes to the question in in the chat box. In South Africa, for those people that are not here, we have a situation in which we have an industry that is monopolized, and we have one player that is dominant in the industry. We have held challenges of supply, unsustainable supply, that impacted on the ability of other sectors of the economy operating, which are dependent on sustainable supply of energy, as well as ability of the country to transcend into just solutions, including, for example, moving away from the climate or environment risky options to options that are more sustainable. So what has happened is there is a process which is led by a national, that is a planning angle to it, which is led by the production of a national plan, which is called the National Resource Plan. And in it, in solving the problem, it identifies a number of interventions. One of those interventions is to deal with the lack of integration. It is to deal with lack of space for participation and co-production options. We have made attempts at the level of the industry, which is the energy industry, in the late 1990s to the beginning of the 2000s, which was abandoned, where we were attempting to open up the industry for more players to come in. We call that the electricity redistribution program. In that program, what was the attempt was to try and ensure that the industry is open up for co-production options, which now we are beginning through this new plan of National Resource Plan to go back to solutions such as those. And part of the players now that have come up to start and begin a planned solution towards undoing or slowly unraveling the monopolistic approach or the monopolistic situation in the South African energy industry is the role of small-scale producers of electricity and mixed type of energy producers linked to the single grid that we have and operating in the country. There is a process underway which is aimed at unbundling the current monopoly into three components. Secondly, there is a process that has now been opened for additional role players to start playing a role in generation, in distribution, as well as a role in management of parts of the network. Currently, there is an engagement which SALGA, as an association of municipality, is inherently involved in, which is aimed at lobbying to create a space for a meaningful role for the local government sphere, which is represented through 257 municipalities that make 48% of the business called Eskom. So by amount of sales or intake of what they generate. So there is that process. At a local level, there is now a process of engagement that is beginning to unroll. And this is at the beginning stages, at the earliest phases, which now involves a series of engagements between localized producers working with a local authority and negotiating with a national function holder of this, which is the national department, and a player within that, which is Eskom, that is currently the monopoly, as well as a regulatory mechanism or a regulator in this context, the NERSA, or the National Energy Regulatory Authority of South Africa, for those people that are not here. So there is that process that is happening. So we are in that process, and I think planners in their localities, please, this is as much an engineering as it is a planning problem. We need to be part of a solution in ensuring that we assist to the country at national level, provincial level, and local level to plan for a sustainable energy supply through development of proper energy plans, which involve series of operational mechanisms to ensure availability of energy and participation of different players, including the PPPs, the independent power producers, IPPs, as well as municipalities as role players in that production channel, in that production chain. So I think I'm not sure if I am helping with the issues that and comments that are raised. Some of them are not questions, they are comments, but that is the process to provide a context to it from a point of view of planning and co-production. So there is a great role for facilitating co-production in this, because the National Resource Plan requires participation and integration of those intentions within our local municipal plans, our regional plans, as well as our sector plans that deal with these issues at a local level. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Anu. And I think what was so nice and over-encompassing about what you said, and the planners and people have been talking about urbanization and people moving to cities, etc., for the last 2 days now. So I think that planners have a responsibility in terms of planning towards this energy efficiency and this, all the good climate change and the green solutions around all of this. So I don't think that planners should sit back. Obviously, they have a role to play in shaping the way we move forward. I'd like to basically just say a huge thank you to my panelists this morning for joining me. And I'm hoping that the contributions for myself were significant enough to give planners that were on this call some kind of reflective opportunity to sit back and to rethink the way we do co-production. What is co-production to you, and how committed are you to this paradigm? Clearly, it's something that we need to move forward around. The days of doing plans in an office and keeping them under your desk and it's our plan are over. These are things that now we need to move together, to build together, to deliver together. And right now, I want to actually say thank you to my panelists and thank you for everybody's contribution this morning. I'd like to hand over to Kayla Brown, who is now going to take you to the next slot of the thank you. Thanks very much.
Thank you very much, Leka. I trust you can hear me.
Yes, we can, Kayla.
Thank you so much. To the end of what has been a very fantastic webinar. I have been given the honor to give the vote of thanks and to take us to closing. But before I do that, some final housekeeping matters. I've just popped the 2 feedback forms into the chat. There is one for the speakers and the presenters and the panelists, and there's another one for the participants. So please do complete the relevant form and do answer the questions, with honesty and clarity, so that we can only improve in future webinars. Partnering organizations involved, working tirelessly behind the scenes to put this all together. So a big thank you to the eThekwini municipality, to the University of KwaZulu-Natal, to the South African Council for Planners, to South African Local Government Association, I think for many months with session. And then a big thank you to all our esteemed speakers, the panelists, the keynote speakers, the breakout room speakers, our final panelist speakers. I think you've all made this webinar so very rich and brought your own experience, whether it be practical or academic, whether it be South African or international. I think together we have really brought an incredible richness to the conversation. And then, of course, thank you to the core team of organizers. And this includes the breakout room facilitators, all of the technical support required to put this together. Thank you to our chairperson of the local organizing committee, Leka Lopi, and her amazing team from the eThekwini municipality, who have really been driving this thing and making sure it's delivered to the excellent standard that we've seen over the last 2 days. And then finally, of course, our audience, our participants. I think your participation has been really excellent. And just to see, you know, the numbers of people hasn't dropped from today to yesterday. We've managed to keep the conversation interesting and engaging. And hopefully, you know, you've learned something. Maybe you've challenged an idea that you had about co-production. And I think maybe the last thing to say is just a wish that we all take what we've learned today and yesterday back into our own practice. So I think with that, we can close what has been a really outstanding webinar and a World Planning Day. And just to say thank you, have a great day, and of course, stay safe. Thank you very much.